Brian, let's talk about states with no state income tax. I believe there are about 9 of them. What are they?
Yeah, the states that have no personal income tax for state purposes are Alaska, Florida, Nevada, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Washington. So those are the states without the personal income tax.
Are states with no income tax historically a more affordable place to live?
Not necessarily. Different states, states are going to get their money one way or the other. They're going to get it through property taxes, they're going to get it through B&O taxes, excise taxes, all different kinds of taxes. And so whether it's income tax, now certainly some states I can point to that have a state income tax, they tend to adopt all the other taxes too. You look at California or New York. They're losing a lot of population right now to states with no income tax, including Washington, Texas, and Florida. I don't think there's a million people moving to South Dakota or Alaska this year. Some, Wyoming maybe, but some of the states that have no income tax. But certainly Florida and Texas are getting a lot of people. One of the big reasons is the lack of income tax. So they're going to get their taxes, but let's say that they rely on sales tax, like the state of Washington. If you're lower income, you're paying a lot more percentage of your income in taxes than somebody high income. Somebody high income is not spending all their money and paying sales tax. So if you're high income in a no income tax state, then you're saving money. If you're lower income, you probably aren't, because they're hitting you pretty hard with their regressive tax system.
So Brian, if I'm hearing you correctly, just because the state has no state income tax doesn't mean that you're paying lower taxes. You mentioned B&O tax, which is business and occupational tax that the people in Washington pay. And let's say that the sales tax is 6% in one state, but here in Washington it's 9%. I guess basically they're going to get their money one way or another. They're just disguising the fact that they have no income tax.
Yeah, and that's why I say everybody is different as to what percentage of their income they're paying relative to these states. But I do know, as I mentioned, a lot of people are moving to no income tax states. And even though Washington, for instance, doesn't have a state income tax, they have probably the worst estate tax in the country. And so a lot of my more wealthy clients, before they pass away, have decided to move not necessarily to a state with no income tax. Maybe their income isn't all that high. They have high assets though. And so they might want to move for estate tax purposes, not for income tax purposes. So analyzing that, I've certainly talked to people that say, oh, I'm going to move to one of these states, and do you really want to live there? Well, no, I hate that state, but I want to save the money. I say, well, consider that too. What's your life worth? Do you want to live someplace you don't want to be? Probably not. So consider that before you just say, I'm going to move to a state with no income tax.
So an estate tax exemption, that's a very important factor to consider when figuring a state to move into, right?
Yeah, so for instance, the state of Washington, if you have more than, say, $2.2 million, the state's going to, when you pass away, the state's going to grab a big chunk of that, where most states have adopted the federal exemption, which is much, much higher. So again, depending on that, you may want to factor that into where you want to live. I would suggest you want to live where your kids are, or your grandkids are, and where you enjoy the climate and the area that you're in first before you worry about the taxes. But certainly if you have options there, you might consider the taxation.
Brian, have you had clients who've decided that they want to live maybe 6.5 months per year in a state with no state income tax, and the other in a state that does have a state income tax? I mean, is that a strategy?
That can be a strategy for income. They usually have to apportion it based on how long they're there, but for estate tax purposes, maybe not. So again, there's a lot that goes into this. So as you consider where you want to live someday, if you're thinking about moving out of state for tax considerations, hopefully this brought up some things that will help you.
Brian, thanks for telling us more about moving to a state with no income tax.